We were always told she was a poison, a painted harlot who draped herself in the decadence of Tyre to rot the soul of Israel from within. But that was a lie. We were told her name was a curse, a synonym for the faithless, a warning whispered to daughters to keep them small, quiet, and obedient. They painted her as a predator in silk, a woman who traded her soul for a crown and her dignity for the favor of foreign gods. But history is written by the men who survived her, and those men were terrified of the lightning she carried in her veins. Close your eyes and breathe in the Samaria they don't want you to remember. It doesn't smell of dusty scrolls or the dry, sterile scent of the desert tabernacle. It smells of crushed jasmine and boiling frankincense. It smells of the salt spray of the Mediterranean clinging to the heavy, purple-dyed wools of a queen who refused to forget the sea. Can you hear it? Not the chanting of the temple, but the rhythmic, primal thrum of drums in the high places, the wild, ecstatic heartbeat of a god that lived in the storm and the rain, not in a box of gold. Jezebel did not walk. She occupied the air. Imagine the ivory palace, a shimmering white ribcage of stone rising against the scorched earth. Inside, she stood like a splinter of obsidian. They say she led King Ahab astray, but they never tell you how a man can be led by a flame. She wasn't a whisper in his ear. She was the wind that fanned his embers, while the prophets of the wilderness ate locusts and dressed in hair shirts, cursing the sun for its heat and the earth for its hunger. Jezebel bathed in the luxury of existence. She understood that power is not found in denial, but in the audacity to reach out and take. She was a daughter of kings, a priestess of the storm, and she looked at the grim, humorless men of the desert and refused to blink. Let's talk about the face. That famous, painted face. The scrolls call it vanity. They call it the mark of a temptress. But look closer at the thick, heavy kohl around her eyes. It wasn't a lure. It was a line of defense. It was the charcoal of a warrior who knew that her battlefield was a throne room. When she painted her eyes, she was sharpening her sword. She looked into the polished bronze of her mirror and saw a woman who would rather be a monster in the eyes of men than a slave in the eyes of their God. The world was narrowing. The sky had turned to brass, the rain had ceased, and the prophets were screaming for blood in the streets. They hated her because she was uncontainable. She brought the gods of the mountain and the waves to a land that wanted only the law. They saw a woman who dared to speak to the heavens without a mediator, and they called it witchcraft. And as the hoofbeats of Jehu's horses began to shake the very foundations of the earth below her window, as the smell of iron and horse sweat rose to meet her, she didn't hide. She didn't pray for a mercy she knew did not exist. She reached for her paints. She put on her crown. She stepped toward the ledge, not as a victim, but as a final, breathtaking challenge. This is the story of the woman who refused to be small, who turned her execution into an icon of defiance, and whose blood soaked the earth so deeply that the grass still tastes of iron and rebellion. This is the truth behind the painted ghost. The pillars of Tyre do not stand on earth. They root themselves in the shifting weight of the deep. Here, the air is thick with the scent of cedar oil and the copper temps of the great sea. Blue-black waves shatter against the foundation of the palace, a rhythmic pulse like the heartbeat of a drowning god. Porphyry floors reflect the flickering oil lamps, casting long, bruised shadows that dance against the ivory inlay. This is the cradle of the world's wealth, a place where silk is heavier than lead and silence is a weapon. But the silence is finally breaking. A shadow falls across the threshold, longer than any man's. She was born from the spray and the storm, a princess carved from salt and audacity. To her, the gods were not distant whispers in a desert wind, but tangible powers etched into the very stones of the harbor. Her father, Ethbal, priest-king of the Cypanonians, sits upon a throne of obsidian, his hands stained with the blood of ritual and the ink of trade. He looks at his daughter and sees more than a child. He sees a bridge of flesh and bone. The city breathes with the clinking of silver. Yet a new sound approaches from the south. It is the sound of iron hooves, and it demands a price. Men from the rugged hills of Samaria arrive, smelling of parched earth and unyielding law. They bring with them the scent of the dry interior, a scent that clashes with the brine of the Phoenician coast. Their king, Ahab, seeks the ocean's favor and the merchant's secrets. They offer an alliance of steel and grain, but the cost is etched in the high price of a royal crown. Her father does not ask for her consent. He demands her divinity. He trades the girl for the security of the coast, unaware that he is exporting a living storm. The scroll is unrolled, and her name is written in fire. She does not weep as the handmaidens drape her in the forbidden hue of the murex, smell the deep, pulsating purple that looks like oxygenated blood in the sun. They bind her wrists in gold that feels like cold shackles, yet she wears them as armor. She watches her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, seeing not a bride, but an iconoclast in the making. The god of the hills is a jealous master, they say, but he has never met the daughter of the sea. She sharpens her gaze until it cuts through the incense smoke like a ritual blade. The doors of the sanctuary swing open, revealing a path that leads only one way. The journey away from the salt spray is a slow descent into a world of beige stone and rigid altars. As the towers of Tyre fade into the mist, the air loses its bite and grows heavy with the dust of old men's laws. She carries her gods with her not in chests of wood, but in the marrow of her spine. She is the Tyrian export that no temple can contain, a spark of indigo thrown into a furnace of gray. The hills of Israel loom ahead, jagged and suspicious, waiting to swallow the girl who would be a queen. But as she crosses the border, she realizes she isn't the one being consumed. She stands tall in her chariot, a monument of defiance against the setting sun. Ahab waits at the gates of Samaria, a man who expects a wife, but receives a revolution. The air between them crackles with the friction of two worlds, colliding, one of ancient maritime mysteries and one of singular, jealous fire. She looks at the temple of the desert god and smiles a smile of beautiful, gilded malice. She has brought the ocean to the desert, and the desert will never be dry again. She steps down, her sandals clicking against the foreign stone like a hammer. The war for the soul of the kingdom has begun, and she has already claimed the first casualty. The iron-bound chests groaned as they were dragged across the threshold of Samaria, exhaling the heavy, humid breath of the great sea. Inside lay the anatomy of a revolution, limestone limbs of silver-eyed bales, and jars of Tyrian dye that bled into the dust like fresh wounds. I watched the local priests recoil. They smelled the brine and the sulfur, attempts of salt that promised to rot their silent, sun-bleached altars from the inside out. I did not come to share their god. I came to drown him. Then, the first lid creaked open. The shadows within the crates didn't just move, they breathed. Out stepped 400 men with painted eyes and razors tucked into their silk belts. The heralds of a divinity that demands to be tasted. We climbed the hills where the air is thin and silence is a weapon. There, we planted the Asherah poles, carved from the heartwood of foreign forests. Their curves, a mocking contrast to the jagged, sterile stones of the local creed. My fingers traced the cold silver of an idol's throat, feeling a pulse of power that required no permission to exist. The ground beneath my feet began to pulse. The desert air, once dry as bone, began to thicken with the scent of burning storax and the sweat of ecstatic dancers. This was the high place, the altar where the sky meets the earth in a violent, weeping embrace. We did not pray in whispers. We screamed in colors. I watched the smoke rise, not in a straight line to an indifferent heaven, but in swirling, indigo spirals that choked the very light of the morning. Beneath the shimmering heat, the heavens remained cruelly blue, as if their own protector had turned his back in shame. Astarte does not ask for piety, she asks for the marrow. I raised the chalice, the wine thick as syrup, and poured it onto the parched earth. watching the red liquid vanish into the cracks. The earth hissed, a sound like 1,000 thirsty snakes, as it drank the essence of the sea. The local elders stood at the perimeter, their faces pale masks of horror, watching their ancestral silence being raped by the thunder of our drums. They expected the sky to fall, but instead, the first stone of the old altar finally fell. The king approached, his robes heavy with the dust of a dying tradition. I met his gaze, my lips curved into that serrated smile of gilded malice. I saw him falter, caught between the invisible fire of his fathers and the tangible, perfumed heat radiating from my skin. I took his hand, pulling him toward the edge of the precipice where the idols stood like sentinels of a new age. He looked down into the valley, and for the first time, he didn't see a promised land. He saw a victim. Slowly, the high priest's throat began to tighten. My sandals clicked against the foreign stone, a rhythmic hammer strike pinning the soul of this kingdom to the floor of my temple. The desert would never be dry again. I had brought the monsoon in my lungs and the tidal wave in my veins. The air between us crackled, the friction of two worlds grinding together until the sparks ignited the horizon. I looked at the temple of the desert god, its stark walls, a tomb for a spirit that refused to dance. The war for the soul of the kingdom has begun, and the first casualty is already cooling in the shade. The air in Samaria usually tastes of cedar and roasted lamb, but today it carried the stench of the unwashed wilderness. He didn't walk. He erupted from the shadows of the colonnade, a jagged tear in the silk tapestry of my court. His cloak was a mangled hide of camel hair, cinched with a belt of raw leather that bit into his waist like a parasite. Elijah. The name felt like a mouthful of gravel. He stood before the ivory throne, his eyes burning with the manic light of a man who has stared too long at a sun that hates him. Then, he inhaled. That breath was a vacuum, pulling the humidity from the very pores of my handmaidens. Around us, the fountains of the palace didn't just stop. They seemed to retreat, the water recoiling back into the earth, as if terrified of the sound vibrating in his throat. He looked at Ahab, my king, my puppet, my beautiful conquest, and saw nothing but a shadow to be cast aside. The Tishbite didn't bow. He didn't offer the rhythmic platitudes of a subject. Instead, he gripped the air with his calloused palms, twisting the unseen threads of the sky until the blue above us began to bruise. "As the Lord God of Israel lives," he croaked, his voice the sound of tectonic plates grinding over ancient bones. He spoke of a lock without a key, of heavens turned to iron, and a dew that would forget the recipe for morning. I felt the moisture evaporate from my tongue, the velvet of my throat turning to sandpaper in a single, agonizing heartbeat. No rain, no mist, only the scorching breath of his jealous ghost, until he deigned to speak again. He threw the curse like a spear into the center of my garden, and the lilies began to shrivel before his echoes died. I laughed, a sharp obsidian sound that should have shattered his resolve, but he was already turning his back on the splendor of the balls. My priests stepped forward, their knives gleaming with the promise of 100 sacrifices to bring the clouds back. But the Tishbite was a phantom flickering in the heat haze. He moved toward the gates with a predatory grace, leaving behind a wake of sudden, unnatural heat that warped the very marble of the pillars. I reached for my guard, my fingers itching for the cooling sensation of his blood, but the prophet had simply vanished into the shimmering air of the noon sun. The days that followed were a slow-motion strangulation of the land. My gardens, once a lush riot of purple and gold, became a cemetery of brittle stalks and gray dust. We poured the wine of Tyre into the parched earth, chanting the secret names of Astarte until our throats bled, but the sky remained a mocking, polished mirror. Ahab paced the ramparts, his crown feeling heavier with every cloudless sunset, looking for the man who had stolen the spirit of the storm. It wasn't just the water that was missing. It was the audacity of a god who would dare to starve a queen. I stood on the balcony of the ivory house, watching the horizon turn the color of an old wound. The drought was a physical weight, a parasite feeding on the marrow of my kingdom. Yet I felt a dark electricity rising within me. If he wanted a desert, I would give him a wasteland populated by the ghosts of his own kind. I looked at the empty cisterns and saw not a lack of life, but a blank canvas for my vengeance. The war was no longer about rain or altars. It was about whose voice would finally crack the silence of the burning sky. Ahab lay upon his couch, his face turned toward the damp stone of the inner wall, refusing the honeyed wine and the roasted kid. The air in the palace tasted of stagnant dust and his own souring pride, a heavy shroud that stifled the breath of my court. Through the arched window, the horizon turned the color of an old wound, a bruised purple bleeding into the twilight. I stepped across the threshold, my silk skirts hissing like a nest of disturbed vipers against the floor. The king of Israel wept for a cluster of grapes he could not buy. Naboth had stood amidst his vines, his fingernails rimmed with the very soil he worshipped, and looked through my husband as if he were a ghost. The Lord forbid it. The peasant had rasped, his breath smelling of turned earth, an ancient, rotting law. To him, the dirt was a holy relic, a piece of his father's bones that no gold could ever weigh down. He chose a scrap of hillside over the favor of the throne, an insult that curdled in Ahab's chest like spoiled milk. But Naboth did not know that laws are merely ink waiting to be spilled. I reached down and pried the heavy signet ring from Ahab's limp, sweating fingers, the metal slick with his cowardice. The gold was warm, pulsing with a power he was too fearful to wield. A silent sun trapped in my palm. I felt a dark electricity rising within me, a sharp contrast to the drought-strangled silence that gripped the city outside. "Arise," I whispered, my voice a blade drawn slowly from a sheath of velvet. "Eat, and let your heart be merry. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth, the Jezreelite." He did not see the predator behind my eyes, in the flickering light of a tallow lamp. I dipped the reed into the ink, the black fluid, thick as clotted blood. I wrote to the elders, those gray-bearded men who hid their greed behind prayers, commanding a fast, a holy masquerade, where piety would serve as the executioner's mask. They were to set Naboth on high, to honor him before the public eye, only to tear him down with the tongues of paid liars. The parchment crinkled beneath my hand, a dry, dead skin that would soon carry the weight of a man's final, desperate, gasping heartbeat. I pressed the king's seal into the hot, scarlet wax, the image of the lion biting deep into the soft, yielding red. It was a beautiful symmetry. A man who loved the land so much would soon be buried beneath it, his blood feeding the very roots he refused to yield. I watched the smoke from the candle coil upward, a thin ghost dancing toward the rafters before vanishing into the dark. There is a specific music in the scratch of a quill when it writes a tragedy. Now, the letters were wings, flying toward the city where Naboth slept in doomed ignorance. The drought was a parasite feeding on the marrow of my kingdom, but the blood of a righteous man would be a far richer libation than rain. If he wanted a dessert, I would give him a wasteland populated by the ghosts of his own kind, starting with the one who dared to say no to a queen. I looked at the empty cisterns and saw not a lack of life, but a blank canvas for my vengeance. The war was no longer about rain or altars. It was about whose voice would finally crack the silence of the burning sky. Samaria does not bleed, it flakes. I walk through halls where the walls are skinned in elephant tusk, cool and unyielding against the suffocating heat of a dying world. Every archway is a ribcage carved from the spoils of distant forests, polished until it reflects the hollows of my own eyes. Here, the drought is merely an aesthetic choice, a sharpening of the light. We sit atop a mountain of bleached bone, drinking from chalices that sweat more than the slaves who bear them. I run my thumb along a fretwork of lilies, feeling the jagged edge where an artisan died. But even the ivory has ears. Beneath the shimmering white veneer, the iron pulses. It is the sound of sandals on basalt, the rhythmic clink of mail, and the long shadows of the colonnades. My kingdom is a clockwork of whispers, a tapestry woven from the breath of gossips and the silence of the terrified. I have planted eyes in the marketplaces and tongues beneath the floorboards of the counting houses. No man coughs in the gutter without the sound echoing back to my private chambers. I am the spider at the center of a web made of silver wire and sharpened blades. I was waiting for a single, discordant vibration. It came from the vineyard, a patch of stubborn green that dared to cling to the dust like a parasite. Naboth, a man whose soul is as stiff as the roots of his ancestral vines, looked at the king's seal and saw only paper. He clutched his dirt as if it were the hem of his god's robe, refusing the gold of a crown for the rot of his heritage. He does not understand that in Samaria, nothing belongs to the earth. Everything belongs to the throne. His refusal was a spark dropped into a cellar of dry hay. Now, the fire begins to climb. I dipped my stylus not in ink, but in the distilled essence of his arrogance. The letters I wrote were masterpieces of shadow, signed with Ahab's signet, but breathed into life by my own lungs. I commanded a fast, a holy, hollow spectacle where the hungry would sit and watch the righteous be flayed by their own piety. The law is a blunt instrument, and I have learned to swing it with the grace of a dancer. Two men of ill repute, their consciences, long since bartered for a flagon of wine, were already rehearsing their lies. The trap was set, but the bait was still breathing. The palace grew colder as the evening purpled the sky, a bruised color that promised no rain, only deeper shadows. I watched the stars, those cold, indifferent eyes of a deity I intended to blind. My ivory sanctuary felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum for a living god. The wealth we amassed, the cedar from Lebanon, the gold from Ophirit, all felt brittle, a fragile shell protecting a heart that had long since turned to obsidian. If the heavens would not provide water, I would irrigate the soil with something thicker, something that screams. I could feel the city holding its breath. The iron gates groaned, a sound of hunger that mirrored my own. Naboth's vineyard would soon be a courtyard of ash, a monument to the price of defiance. I do not crave the grapes. I crave the silence that follows the breaking of a man. Let his God look down upon the stones and see his favored son crushed beneath the weight of a queen's whim. The drought had stripped the world of its masks, leaving only the raw, white bone of power. I stepped onto the balcony, the air tasting of copper and impending lightning. The first stone was about to fly. I dipped my fingers into the mortar, where the stibnite has been ground to a fine, lethal silk. This is not vanity. It is the forging of a blade. To the prophets, this soot is the mark of the harlot, but to me, it is the shadow of a mountain cast over their sun-bleached morality. I press the black powder into my lids, the grains biting into the delicate flesh. It is cold, heavy with the weight of subterranean empires. I am not hiding my age. I am excavating my power from the white bone of my skull. Yet, the shadows are moving. The bronze mirror reflects a ghost who refused to die. I drag the ivory wand along the waterline of my eyes, anointing the threshold between the internal soul and the external war. This is the antimony shield. It deflects the gaze of the righteous, turning their judgment back upon their own small, trembling hearts. Each stroke of the coal is a line drawn in the sand of their holy desert. They call for a god of thunder, but I answer with the silence of polished stone. My reflection is no longer human. It is a monument waiting for the first crack. My lips are the color of a pomegranate burst open by a soldier's heel, stained with the crushed bodies of cochineal insects and the essence of saffron. I paint the curve of my mouth into a permanent sneer of velvet. There is a sacred geometry in this art, a way of mapping the face so that it becomes a cathedral of defiance. I feel the leaden pigments seeping into my pores, poisoning the very blood that the dogs will soon crave. I am becoming a relic while the heart still beats against my ribs. but the gates are groaning beneath a heavy hand. Let the Tishbite scream of fire and drought. My skin remains as smooth as the marble of Tyre. I dust my cheeks with the pulverized remains of pearls. A shimmer of moonlight captured in the middle of a noonday slaughter. The prophets fear the painted woman because she is the only thing they cannot break with a prayer. I am the blasphemy of aesthetics, the refusal to look like the dust from which their God allegedly fashioned us. I have improved upon the clay. I have built a fortress behind my lashes that no prayer can penetrate. Somewhere, a chariot wheel strikes a stone. The air in the chamber grows thick with the scent of spikenard and impending iron. I hear the distant thunder of Jehu's approach, a rhythmic pounding that mimics the pulse in my throat. I do not reach for a dagger or a veil. I reach for the gold leaf, pressing it onto my brow until I am crowned in the metal of the earth's deep greed. This face is my final testament, an iconoclasm of the flesh. I will meet my end not as a victim, but as a masterpiece that demands to be shattered. The hoofbeats are closer now, shaking the floorboards. I stand, my robes trailing like a river of wine across the cold floor. The paint is dry now, a mask of unyielding mineral that feels more real than the skin beneath it. I walk toward the window, the antimony shield shimmering in the dying light of the afternoon. Let him come. Let the usurper see what it means to look into the eyes of a queen who has looked into the face of God and laughed. I lean over the parapet, the wind catching my hair, exposing the throat they wish to cut. I am ready to fall, but I will fall as an idol. My shadow touches the street. The silk of my robe drags across the floor like a serpent through dry grass. My 400, the sons of Asherah, are gathered at the long table, their fingers stained with the purple of Tyre and the grease of the sacrificial fat. They are my beautiful, doomed echoes. We feast while the sky turns to brass, drinking wine that tastes of copper and ancient dust. The air in the palace is thick with the scent of frankincense and the sweat of men who know they are being hunted by a desert ghost. Somewhere in the distance, the first drumbeat of the mountain begins. My prophets rise, a phalanx of golden bone, their eyes glazed with the ecstasy of the high places. They do not see the drought as a curse. They see it as a furnace meant to temper their resolve. I touch the cheek of the youngest, his skin like parchment under my palm. He smells of cedar and the coming rain that refuses to fall. They march toward Carmel, a ribbon of color against the bleached stone of the hills. I watch from the balcony as the horizon swallows them whole, leaving behind only the cold, lingering echo of their chanting. On the heights, the air is thin enough to bleed. The stones of the altar are cold, despite the sun that screams from the zenith. My 400 begin the dance. The rhythmic thud of feet against the earth sounding like a heart struggling to beat in a dying chest. They call to the clouds, to the storm rider, to the Lord of the Flies. They carve their flesh with obsidian knives, offering the red vintage of their veins to a sky that remains stubbornly, cruelly blue. Then, a shadow falls over the altar, a shadow that does not belong to any living thing. Elijah stands there, a pillar of unwashed wool and jagged lightning. He mocks them, his voice a rasp of sand against silk, asking if their God is sleeping, or perhaps relieving himself in the thicket. My prophets scream louder, their voices breaking into a jagged cacophony of desperation. The ground is slick now, not with rain, but with the life tide of 400 men who would die for a queen's smile. They are dancing on the edge of an abyss, and the sky begins to ripple like a curtain pulled back by an invisible, trembling hand. The fire does not fall, it strikes. It is not the hearth glow of a domestic god, but a white-hot spear of jealousy that devours the wood, the stone, and the very dust. The roar is deafening, a sound that swallows the screams of my beautiful boys. I feel the heat here, leagues away in the palace, a singe against my soul. The sky cracks open, heavy with the scent of ozone and charred meat. The Kishon River will run thick today, and the water will not be sweet enough to wash away the iron taste of what is coming next. The rain finally breaks, a torrential downpour that tastes of salt and betrayal. It washes the soot from the rooftops, but cannot clean the shadow that has settled over the high places. My prophets are gone, turned to ash and memory, their blood a red map leading back to my door. I stand by the window, my face a mask of antimony and resolve, watching the storm clouds gather like an army of ghosts. The usurper thinks he has won because he found fire, but he has forgotten that I am the one who keeps the hearth. The street below is silent, waiting for the first drop of blood to fall. The palace breathes with a heavy, labored rhythm, like a beast dying in its sleep. I brush the soot from the ivory windowsill, but the grime is stubborn. It has burrowed into the marble's pores, a dark gospel written in the language of smoke. Ahab sits in the shadows, his crown tilted like a broken halo. He smells of old wine and sour fear, his eyes tracking the spiders that weave webs across the golden lions of his throne. He speaks of peace while the floorboards rot beneath us. The prophet's blood has dried into a rust-colored cartography upon the stones, a map that leads nowhere but back to the silence from the throne. Beyond the cedar gates, the horizon is no longer a line of light, but a bruise of deepening indigo. Ben-Hadad's chariots do not care for the whims of mountain hermits or the lightning of a jealous god. They speak in the dialect of iron and the scream of grinding axles. I hear the scouts whispering in the corridors, their voices like tree leaves skittering across a tomb. My husband, Ahab, masks his kingship in the rags of a common soldier, believing he can hide from the gaze of a sky god beneath a dented breastplate. He smells of cedar and fear, a pungent musk that clings to the silk hangings of our bedchamber. He goes to Ramoth-Gilead to reclaim what the dust has already claimed. I watch from the high parapet, my fingers tracing the cold ivory of the balustrade. The sun is a dying ember, and beneath the wheels of his chariot, the prophecy begins to stir in its shallow grave. The sky bleeds violet as the reports arrive. They say a nameless archer drew his bow at a venture, a blind arrow finding the narrow gap between the plates of Ahab's armor. He did not fall. He stood propped in his chariot, a puppet held upright by his own congealing blood, watching the sun set on a kingdom he could no longer hold. When they washed his chariot at the pool of Samaria, the stray dogs licked the crimson broth from the stone. The prophecy is a hungry thing, but it has only tasted the first course of the long, dark feast.
I am ready.
Then came Ahaziah, my firstborn, with eyes like his father's, but a heart of brittle glass. He reigned in a fever dream of incense and smoke, a shadow flickering against the encroaching dark. He reached for the heavens and found only the empty, mocking air. I remember the sound of the wooden lattice, splintering a dry, snapping noise like a bird's wing breaking. He fell through the upper chamber, his body a broken statuette upon the courtyard floor. He called for the priests of Baal-zebub, but the gods were silent as the stone, and the silence began to scream his name. Joram followed, the second fruit of my womb, a king of scars and desperation. He wears the crown like a leaden weight, his brow perpetually damp with the sweat of the doomed. We are the Omrides, the masters of ivory and iron, yet we are being unmade by a whisper in the desert. In the distance, a cloud of dust rises, thick and suffocating. It is not the wind. It is the fury of a madman driving a chariot, as if the fires of Gehenna were nipping at his heels. The gates of Jezreel groan under a weight they were never meant to carry. I stand at the window, painting my eyes with stibium, a mask of coal, to meet the ending. Joram rides out to meet the madman, Jehu, the traitor who smells of horse sweat and holy war. I see the bow drawn back, the tension of the string a hum that vibrates in my own teeth. The arrow does not miss. It pierces Joram's back, driving through the heart that once beat against my own breast. He falls into the field of Naboth, the soil drinking the royalty it was promised. And now the dust is coming for the source of the line. The ivory palace feels cold now, a ribcage stripped of its meat. I hear the horses' hooves hammering on the cobblestones, a rhythm of judgment. My maids tremble, their perfumes souring with the scent of their terror, but I do not flinch. I tire my head and array my jewels, a queen of a vanishing world, defying the god of the mountain with every stroke of my brush. Let the usurper come. Let the prophecy finish its jagged meal. I look down from the heights and see the dogs gathering in the shadows, waiting for a queen to become a ghost. The sky over Jezreel is the color of a fresh bruise, purple and swollen with the coming storm. Below, the cobblestones do not merely ring. They scream under the iron-shod weight of Jehu's fury. I hear the horses, their breath, a rhythmic gallop of wet thunder, their hooves carving a tally of my sins into the very dust of the earth. The palace walls, once thick with the scent of cedar and roasted marrow, now reek of cold ash and the metallic temps of impending slaughter. My lungs draw in the stagnant air, yet my hand remains as steady as the mountain. A single silver pin pricks my thumb, drawing a bead of blood that refuses to fall. I do not wipe the red droplet away. It is the first tithe paid to a god I never invited into my bed. My mirror is a sheet of beaten bronze, reflecting a face that has long since forgotten how to weep. The wrinkles are not maps of sorrow, but trenches where I have buried my enemies. I take the Kolthik, black soot, harvested from the altars of Baaland, drag it across my eyelids. It is a heavy stroke, a warrior's mark, turning my gaze into a sunless cavern. My maids are sobbing, their hands fluttering like trapped sparrows. One girl drops the jar of spikenard, and the glass shatters with the sound of a breaking spine. The scent of the oil spills across the tiles, thick and cloying, fighting the stench of the fear that leaks from their pores. I turn to them, my crown, a weight of gold that feels lighter than the silence between us. I do not offer comfort. A queen is a monument, not a mother. I dip my fingers into the crushed cinnabar, staining my lips the color of a ritual sacrifice. Outside, the shouting has begun, the guttural cries of men who believe they are the instruments of a divine hammer. They are merely the wind, and I am the cliff. The heavy oak doors downstairs groan under a blow that shudders through the soles of my feet. He is here. Jehu, the madman, the usurper, with the blood of my kin, staining his chariot wheels like rust. I rise and walk toward the lattice window, my robes hissing against the floor like a desert viper. The courtyard below is a sea of flickering torches and jagged steel. A chaotic dance of shadows choreographed by a prophet's curse. I see him in the center of the storm, his face a mask of righteous filth, looking up at the heights he was never meant to scale. He thinks he comes for a victim, but he finds only a spectacle. I lean out into the night air, and the wind tries to snatch the gems from my throat. Had Zimri peace, who slew his master. My voice cuts through the cacophony, a silver blade slicing through the roar of the mob. The silence that follows is a vacuum, a sudden absence of breath as the usurper halts his horse. I am a vision of painted ivory and ancient gold, a ghost already haunting the living. I do not look at the eunuchs cowering behind me. I look through the sky, past the stars, toward the god who demands my extinction. If I am to be the feast for the pariah dogs, I shall be seasoned with salt. The eunuchs move, their shadows lengthening as they reach for the hem of my royal robes. I feel their palms, sweaty and trembling, against the small of my back. They seek favor from the new king by offering up the old world. I do not resist. I lean further into the abyss, watching the dogs gather at the foot of the wall, their eyes reflecting the torchlight like burning coins. They are hungry for the meat of a queen, unaware that the spirit cannot be chewed. The sky cracks open, a flash of white fire illuminating the final arc of my descent. I am the falling star of Sidon, as the stones rush up to meet my face. I hear the first snap of bone. The air in the high chamber thickens with the scent of crushed lilies and the metallic temps of impending rain. My eunuchs stand like pale, unlit candles against the cedar-paneled walls. their faces masks of powdered ivory and ancient secrets. They have bathed me in oils of myrrh, their fingers trembling as they painted my eyelids with the dust of crushed malachite. Below, the iron-rimmed wheels of Jehu's chariot grind the gravel of Jezreel into fine white flour, a sound like a giant's teeth gnashing in the dark. The silence in the room is a held breath, sharp as a whetted blade. Jehu bellows from the mud-spattered courtyard, his voice a gravelly sacrilege that tears through the silk hangings. He does not look for a queen. He looks for a carcass. I turn my head, the gold ornaments in my hair chiming like funeral bells. My loyal shadows, men who have tasted my wine and carried my palanquin through the perfumed gardens of Sidon, shift their weight. Their eyes, once pools of subservience, now flicker with the cold, calculating light of survivors. They realize the old world is a burning ship, and I am the only mast left to burn. They step forward, their velvet slippers silent on the mosaic floor, soft hands that once applied the coal to my brow with the delicacy of a moth's wing, now seize my silk-clad arms. There is no tremor in their grip now, only the desperate strength of those buying their lives with the currency of my blood. I do not scream. A goddess does not howl at the wind. I feel the cold stone of the window ledge bite into my waist as they heave my body upward. The stars above are indifferent diamonds, watching as the threshold of my sovereignty becomes the altar of my sacrifice. The city lights below begin to spin. I am thrust into the yawning maw of the night. For a heartbeat, I am suspended, a purple-clad ghost haunting the vertical space between the palace and the pit. The eunuchs look down at me, their faces receding into the darkness like pale moons, drowning in an ink-black sea. They have traded their queen for the crumbs of a usurper's table, throwing away the nectar of royalty for the bitter vinegar of fear. My robes billow around me, a frantic beating of silk wings that cannot fly. The wind howls a dirge in my ears, stripping away the scent of myrrh. The eunuchs watch from above, leaning over the ledge to witness their betrayal complete. They seek favor from the new king by offering up the old world, casting me out like refuse from a feast. I do not resist. I lean further into the abyss, watching the dogs gather at the foot of the wall, their eyes reflecting the torchlight like burning coins. They are hungry for the meat of a queen, unaware that the spirit cannot be chewed. I feel the gravity claiming me now, a physical manifestation of a prophecy written in the stars and whispered in the blood of the prophets. The sky cracks open, a flash of white fire illuminating the final arc of my descent. I am the falling star of Sidon, a streak of carmine against the weeping stone. The ground rushes up, a gray tide of unyielding rock, determined to break the vessel of my spirit. I see the jagged edges of the pavement, the very foundation of the city I helped build, rising to meet me with a lover's cruel intensity. As the stones rush up to meet my face, I hear the first snap of bone, the sudden jagged rhythm of a goddess returning to the earth. The impact is a choir of breaking glass and splintered cedar. The Jezreel stones are not cold. They are hungry. I feel the shift from queen to carrion, a sudden wet weight as the breath of my lungs becomes a fine red mist upon the cobblestones. My vision is a kaleidoscope of shattered indigo. The sky I once commanded now mocks me from between the cracks of the earth. I am a spill of expensive wine across a common floor, and the shadows in the periphery are beginning to move with a low, guttering growl. They have been waiting in the gutters, their bellies tight with the prophecy of a madman. I hear the scratch of claws before I feel the heat of their breath. It is a rhythmic, scraping sound, the music of the scavengers. The air is thick with the scent of copper and unwashed fur, a pungent musk that smothers the last traces of my jasmine perfume. My fingers, once heavy with gold and power, now twitch uselessly against the cold flint, feeling the vibrations of four-legged gods approaching. One snout, wet and black as obsidian, presses against the hollow of my throat, testing the pulse that still thrashes like a trapped bird. The first bite is not a scream, but a revelation of the hunger I have nurtured. They do not eat like kings. They tear like the desperate. The Tishbite's words were a seed planted in the dirt, and now the harvest has come, dripping and raw. I am being dismantled. Piece by piece, the Sidonian star is extinguished in the gullets of curs. The velvet of my robes is trampled into the mire, soaked in the liquid history of my reign. I feel the tug of sinew and the sharp, clinical snap of cartilage as they work with a frantic, sacred efficiency. They are reclaiming the stolen divinity of my flesh, bone by jagged bone. A tawny bitch with eyes like yellow sulfur locks her teeth into the meat of my thigh, dragging the remains of my dignity into the deeper shadows of the wall. There is no pain anymore, only a profound, hollow lightness. I am becoming the dust I despised. The city watches from its high windows, but I am down here, in the spit and the snarl, where the true gods reside. My hair, once braided with pearls, is now a tangled shroud of filth and matted crimson, trailing behind as they pull me toward the dump. Even the crown cannot protect the brain when the skull begins to yield. What remains of Jezebel? I am a red smear on the masonry, a feast for the forgotten. The dogs are efficient priests of the void. They swallow the pride of Lebanon and the fury of Baal without a single flinch. I watch through a fading lens as my own hands, the hands that painted the eyes of a queen and signed the deaths of prophets, are worried between yellowed teeth. There is a terrible, rhythmic crunching that sounds like the closing of a heavy iron gate. I am vanishing into the bellies of the beasts, and the silence is deafening. When the moon reaches its zenith, the feast slows to a panting halt. They leave the things that even the starving cannot stomach. My skull lies upturned, a hollow ivory bowl to catch the midnight dew. Beside it, the palms of my hands and the soles of my feet remain the extremities of my rebellion, untouched and stark against the bloodied mud. I am no longer a woman, nor a queen, but a scattered map of a life that dared to incinerate the heavens. The prophecy is satisfied, but in the marrow of the dogs, I still burn with a dark, unquenchable fire. The iron scent of the courtyard air thickens, not with the fragrance of cedar or frankincense, but with the heavy, metallic temps of what I used to be. Above, the stars are cold, unblinking eyes, watching the feast of the mongrels. The scribes have already begun to dip their reeds into the gall of their own righteousness, eager to turn my marrow into ink. They do not write of the woman who balanced the scales of empires, but of the void they wish to fill with their own terror. Behind their teeth, a new name begins to ferment. They are carving a shape out of the dark that has nothing to do with my soul. This is how a saint is unmade, not by the sword, but by the adjective. They take my defiance and call it pride. They take my worship and call it sorcery. Every jewel I wore is recast as a snare for the weak-willed. They stitch together a hagiography of hate, a holy tapestry woven from the threads of their own insecurity. They need me to be the shadow so their pale god can seem like light. My life is being stripped away faster than the meat from my ribs, replaced by a ghost that will haunt every pulpit. Yet, the more they erase the queen, the more they construct something far more permanent. Listen to the way they speak my name now, Jezebel. It is no longer a title, but a hiss, a linguistic poison that curdles on the tongue. They have turned a phonetic beauty into a shorthand for the untouchable. In the years to come, my name will be a brand, a word spat at women who dare to look at the sun without flinching. This is the etymology of malice, taking the sacred and dragging it through the gutter until the gold is indistinguishable from the filth. They believe that by defining me, they have finally managed to chain me, but a name, once weaponized, has a tendency to cut the hand that swings it. The dogs are the most honest historians I have ever known. They do not care for theology or the lineage of kings. They care only for the warmth of the kill. They leave behind the white dome of my skull, the twin cups of my palms, and the leathered soles of my feet. These are the extremities of my heresy. The skull that imagined a different heaven, the hands that painted the face of a queen, the feet that walked upon the forbidden altars. They are the artifacts of a rebellion that the earth itself refuses to digest. Even the scavengers know there are some parts of me that are simply too bitter to swallow. Look at the ivory bowl of my head, upturned to collect the weeping of the clouds. It is a chalice for a new kind of communion. I am being reconstructed, bone by bone, into the architect of their nightmares. They will build their cathedrals on the ruins of my reputation, using my memory as the mortar for their walls of shame. Every law they pass, every girl they silence, will be a response to the ghost they are creating here tonight. They are birthing a demon to justify their own hunger for the whip and the flame, but the demon they build is only a mirror of the rot within themselves. The prophecy is satisfied, yet it is a hollow victory. They have scattered me, yes, but in doing so, they have sown my spirit into the very soil of the future. I am no longer a woman, but a frequency of descent. As the midnight dew settles into the hollows of my bone, a quiet alchemy takes place. The dogs slink away into the shadows, their bellies full of royal blood, and within them I begin to wake. The marrow they swallowed does not cool. It pulses with the rhythm of an unquenchable, dark heat. Even in the belly of the beast, I am the fire that will never go out. The centuries do not pass. They merely fold, like heavy moth-eaten velvet. I am no longer a memory of dust in a desert kingdom, but a vapor rising from the cobblestones of London. Here, the air tastes of sulfur and suppressed desire, a city gasping under the weight of its own ironclad morality. Men in high collars whisper my name in the dark, calling it a warning while they secretly trace my silhouette in the flickering gaslight. They fear the stain of me, yet they dip their pens into the very ink of my rebellion, desperate to capture a ghost. But as the nib hits the paper, the scratch sounds like a bone breaking. The painters see me in their opium dreams a pale, lissom specter draped in the heavy silks of antiquity. They call me the fatal aesthetic, a poison flower blooming in the middle of their rigid velvet parlors. They want to bind me to the canvas, to trap my defiance in a frame of gilded lilies and sharp thorns. My eyes, they say, are two black pearls stolen from the throat of a drowned queen, staring back with a coldness that freezes the blood of the righteous. I am the shadow lurking behind the lace, the secret rot beneath the corset's tight embrace. But as the brush strokes settle, the canvas begins to breathe. In the candlelit libraries of the bored and the pious, I am the forbidden chapter. Young women, their fingers trembling with a hunger they cannot name, trace the lines of poems that speak of my pride as if it were a holy relic. I am the daughter of the night, the one who refused to kneel even when the heavens roared with a jealous fury. They see their own chains reflected in the stories of my fall, and in that recognition, a spark of my old fire ignites within their lungs. They tuck my legend under their pillows like a dagger made of glass. Somewhere in the drafty hall, a door that was bolted for a century slowly swings wide. I have become the jewelry of the morning, the braided lock of hair, the jet bead, the obsidian tear. The Victorians wrapped themselves in the finery of the grave, and there I sit, presiding over their funerals like a silent, dark-eyed matron. They think they are honoring the dead, but they are courting the very chaos I invited into the palace garden so long ago. They fear the new woman, the one who walks with my stride and speaks with my tongue. Yet they cannot stop decorating their lives with the symbols of my ruin. I watch them through the silver-backed mirrors, waiting for the glass to crack. Listen to the rustle of crinoline. It sounds like the scales of a great serpent sliding over dry leaves. I am the subtext of every scream in their gothic tales, the haunting melody that lingers long after the piano is shut. They tried to bury me beneath a mountain of etiquette and Bibles, yet I rise through the cracks in their floorboards like hemlock. I am the vertigo they feel when they look over the edge of the cliff, the sudden, violent urge to jump into the dark. I am no longer a corpse for dogs to tear. I am a fever. And now, the room is suddenly growing very cold. The fog thickens, swallowing the street lamps and the steeples. This is the rebirth I promised, not in the flesh, but in the marrow of their nightmares and the heartbeat of their art. I am the iconoclast's muse, the ruin that refuses to be forgotten, the queen who turned her execution into a coronation. They built their entire world on the exclusion of my spirit. But look closely at the architecture of their fear. It is held together by the very stones I threw. The clock strikes 13, and for the first time in an age, I step out from the pages and into the light. The static on the television hums a low, electric dirge, a choir of white noise replacing the temple's ancient chant. I am no longer a corpse beneath the chariot wheels. I am the pixelated glitch in your high-definition dreams. Look at the runway, where the silk clings like wet skin, and the eyeliner is applied with the precision of a ritual sacrifice. They call it high fashion, but I call it armor. My purple robes have been shredded into velvet chokers and leather boots that click like bone against marble. You are watching for the ghost in the machine. The ink on the page was meant to be a shroud, a black-lettered prison to keep me buried in the dirt of Jezreel. But words are treacherous things. They bleed and mutate. The poets took the thorns from my crown and wove them into lyrics that scream against the silence of the sanctuary. Every woman who speaks out of turn, who laughs too loud in the face of a crumbling patriarchy, feels the phantom itch of my coal upon her eyelids. They tried to burn the memory of me, but fire only tempers the steel of a name. Hear the bass drop in the crowded club. That heavy, thumping vibration is the ghost of my heart beating against the ribs of the modern world. I am the silver screen siren with cigarette smoke swirling like incense around a gilded altar. I am the anti-heroine in the velvet cape, the one they love to hate, because I refuse to die quietly in the third act. My image is sold on t-shirts and pressed into vinyl. A commodified rebellion that still carries the bitter scent of cedar and copper. They think they have tamed me into a brand. Walk through the gallery where the statues have been decapitated by the sheer force of my returned gaze. The modern iconoclast doesn't use a heavy hammer. She uses a lens, a brush, a jagged line of code. I am the patron saint of the broken pedestal, the muse who whispers that every temple was always a beautifully decorated tomb. We are shattering the stained glass to let the raw, unfiltered sun spill across the floor. They built their cathedrals to keep the wildness out, but the vines are already pushing through the cracks in the foundation. Examine the blueprints of your morality, and you will find the void where I was supposed to be. I am the negative space, the shadow that gives the light its jagged shape. Every law written to cage the spirit of the feminine is a testament to my lingering power. You do not build such heavy walls for a ghost that cannot bite. I am the salt in the soil that prevents the old crops from growing, ensuring that only the strange and the beautiful can survive. The world you know is tilting toward the edge of my abyss. The clock doesn't tick, it gasps. 13 chimes ring out, a discordant melody that shatters the porcelain veneer of your polite society. I step out from the margins, shedding the skin of the victim to reveal the iridescent scales of a dragon. This is the coronation they feared, not held in a palace of stone, but in the collective awakening of those who were told to be small. The light is no longer blinding. It is a welcoming warmth on my resurrected face. I am not coming back to haunt you. I am already standing right behind you. The 13 chimes do not ring, they collide. Each stroke is a heavy, iron fist against the hollow chest of the world. A discordant melody that vibrates through the floorboards of your cathedrals and the marrow of your well-manicured lives. Can you hear it? That sound is the porcelain veneer of your polite society, finally spiderwebbing, cracking under the weight of a silence that has lasted 3,000 years. You built your morality on the wreckage of my name, using my memory as the mortar to hold your brittle virtues together. But the mortar is screaming now. I am stepping out from the margins of your holy texts, those dusty, yellowed pages where you tried to bury me beneath adjectives of shame and whispers of harlot. I am shedding the skin of the victim that bruised, trampled thing you left in the gutters of Jezreel for the dogs to worry over. Watch as the dry husk falls away to reveal not the rot you expected, but the iridescent scales of a dragon, shimmering with the colors of a sun you were too afraid to look at directly. This is the coronation they whispered about in the dark corners of the temple, the one they tried to prevent with stones and fire. But this crown isn't made of gold or heavy gems. It is forged from the collective awakening of everyone you told to be small, everyone you commanded to kneel until their knees turned to dust. You see, the light is no longer the blinding, scorching glare of a judgmental sun. It has changed. It is a welcoming warmth now, a soft amber glow reflecting off my resurrected face. Do you find it beautiful? Or does it terrify you to see that the fire you used to consume me has only served to temper my spirit into something unbreakable? Listen to the wind. It carries the scent of crushed jasmine and scorched cedar, the perfume of a queen who refused to beg for her life because she knew her soul was never yours to take. I remember the hounds, the rhythmic scrape of their claws on the stone, the hot, copper tang of my own blood pooling in the dust. You thought that was the end, didn't you? You thought that by erasing my body, you could erase the question I posed to your heavens. You believed that if you threw enough mud at the mirror, the reflection would eventually cease to exist. But the mirror didn't break. It multiplied. Every shard of my shattered reputation became 1,000 new eyes, watching you from the shadows of your own history. I am not coming back to haunt you with the rattling of chains, or the moans of the damned. I have no use for the theatrics of the ghost. I am standing right behind you, felt in the sudden chill on the back of your neck when you realized the laws you carved in stone are nothing but sand against the tide of a woman's will. My presence is the shadow that lengthens when you try to walk toward your false altars. I am the silence that follows your prayers, the vast, echoing void that proves your God of silence has no answer for a heart that refuses to be conquered. Look at your hands. Are they shaking? They should be. You are realizing that the evil you painted me with was merely the color of my autonomy. You called me a witch because I knew the names of the stars. You called me a whore because I refused to belong to any man but myself. You called me a monster because I stared into the face of your divine wrath and didn't blink. I was the first to realize that the throne of heaven is empty if it requires the crushing of the human spirit to remain occupied. The 13 chimes are fading now, leaving behind a stillness so profound it feels like the world is holding its breath. The porcelain is gone, scattered in white dust at your feet. You stand in the ruin of your certainties, exposed and shivering. I am the iridescent scale in the dark, the warmth in the cold, the dragon that grew from the ashes of a queen. I am the truth that you cannot pray away, the iconoclast who smashed your idols by simply existing. I did not survive the dogs to seek your forgiveness. I survived to show you that forgiveness is a cage built by those who are afraid of justice. The palace of stone has fallen. The temples are hollow. But here, in this moment of absolute clarity, the coronation is complete. Not with a scepter, but with a breath. Not with a song, but with a scream that turned into a symphony. I am the echo of every no that was ever whispered in the dark, finally finding its voice in the light of a new dawn. I have reclaimed my name, my face, and my fire, and as I stand here, invisible yet undeniable, I offer you the only thing I have left to give the heavy, terrifying weight of the truth. We are told that the righteous shall inherit. The earth and the wicked shall be wiped from memory. Yet here I stand, more vibrant than the saints, and more enduring than the kings who cast me down. If the memory of the sinner outlasts the glory of the pious, and if the blood of the fallen becomes the ink that writes the future, then who truly holds the keys to eternity? Is it the one who obeys the law, or the one who becomes the reason the law was written? When the last bell tolls, and the gods of men are forgotten, will you be remembered for the chains you wore, or for the courage it took to break them and become the monster they feared?